Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. This is a good friend of mine as of many years now that we've known each other. We will describe that our relationship here in the interview as we get going here. But before we get started, I just want to give a quick background to the individual that we have on today, our special guest. Um, his name is Mudar Zahran. He is the Secretary General of the Jordanian opposition, described as the leader of the Palestinian majority in Jordan and a veteran of the U.S. Department of State staff member. That's just a little bit of his background and what he has been doing for these many years now. And Mudar, I know you and you know me, but why don't you give a quick, short summary of yourself to our audience? Who are you? You know, where'd you grow up? That kind of thing.
Okay, I'm Jordanian of Palestinian heritage, so I'm a proud Jordanian to both Jordanian parents who are from Palestinian heritage. They were born around on the outskirts of Jerusalem before the 1960s. My dad was born in 1948, around the time of the war, and my mother, I think 5, 7, maybe 10 years later, in the Nashtachim of the West Bank in Bethlehem. That said, a family situated in Jordan, our country, and we've been fighting the fight for human rights in Jordan, civil rights in Jordan for women, minorities, freedom of religion, and also for a more civil and secular state with a Muslim identity, and at the same time establishing the national identity of Jordan as actually for what really Jordan really is, the 78% of historical British Mandate Palestine. We are seeking to build a nation state which will secure freedom to its citizens and end the apartheid state, which is apartheid regime in Jordan, where the majority Jordanians are discriminated against, and where they are being evaluated in with a believe it or not, with a point system. So your citizenship, your national entitlements are connected to a point system where they calculate who's your father, who's your grandfather, where did you grow up, and so forth, in a very in a regime very similar to North Korea's quote unquote Songbun regime, which is exactly a point system. Jordan is one of the most ridiculously identified kingdoms. Kingdom where a foreign family of no more than 50 individuals. If you count out the wives and the in-laws they married to, they're down to 50 individuals controlling a majority of Jordanians, of which more than 90%, I repeat, are of Palestinian heritage. This
Wow.
has contributed to the ongoing conflict with the Israelis and the ongoing very unfortunate situation in more ways than another, which we will be discussing today. In a nutshell, Jordan controls and fuels a lot of the energy hubs, so fuel hubs for the conflict. The first is the issue of Jerusalem. The royal Hashimite family controls the Al Aqsa Mosque slash Temple Mount.
Hmm.
I'm not sure why is that, because they don't belong there. They occupied eastern Jerusalem in 1948. They had no right to control Al Aqsa Mosque. They still have no right to keep the Al Aqsa Mosque. It's not right, and they fuel. I can only quote the Israeli government in a 2015 statement when there was a lot of trouble on the Temple Mount, Al Aqsa Mosque. A statement by the Israeli government, which you can definitely look up on Google. Israeli government said that the Jordanian government is involved in incitement and action, quote unquote, incitement and action, contributing to the unrest over the Temple Mount slash Al-Aqsa. They
Hmm.
also control the Hashimite royal family, controls the freedom of worship on the Temple Mount. We need to be clear about it. And my position as Jordan's next leader, make no mistake about that, is about the freedom of worship on Al-Aqsa, on the Temple Mount. From an Islamic, and I'm a proud Muslim, from an Islamic point of view, you cannot, according to the Quran, prevent anyone from exercising the right of worship. And from the Hadith point of view, the book of the Hadith, Muhammad, our prophet, allowed the Christians of Arabia to perform the prayers inside his mosque, which is Islam's second most holy site. So we don't have the right to prevent Jews from praying on the Temple Mount. This
So,
is the
quick question here, Mudar. Sorry to cut you off. Um, you're now telling me, as a Muslim, you're now explaining to the audience. I mean, first of all, so you are for sure a devout Muslim. I know
absolute.
that. I know that because when we first met, we actually roomed together, right? So back in 2012, I think it was, we were on a special mission to connect all kinds of different people in social media, in political affairs, what have you. And that's where actually Muda and I met here in Israel. And you surprised me, because I was like, this guy. I mean, like, he's a legit Muslim, devout, and to hear your views about Israel, to hear your views about Jordan, and so on. First of all, it was eye opening for me because I did not know all the things that you were actually telling the group, and in large, also you ended up being interviewed by the Israeli media and so on, and you were able to really get that voice out that we rarely get to hear here as Israelis. So all that to say that what you're saying, this is not, you're not a Israeli Mossad plant, or you know what I mean. Like, there's a lot of like conspiracy theorists out there, when they hear Muslims like you speaking and speaking on Israel in a positive light. Obviously, you're not going to say everything about Israel is peachy and great, you know, but you're very objective about your views. You're very frank about your views, in my opinion. And it's going to be, I think, very jarring for some of the people around the world hearing the from the river to the sea, let Palestine be free, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's all these rioters, there's all these supporters of Palestine. But
Okay.
everything you just mentioned right now, right? There's a few little words there, a few little statements I'm understanding, but the audience isn't probably getting it. Um, so first of all, I just wanted to throw that out. Okay, this is our relationship. We've known each other since 2012, and like I said, I can clearly testify for Mudad himself that I know that he is definitely a devout Muslim and so on. That's why he's on the show. And you're from Jordan, and your family roots are in Israel. Your family roots are pre 1948. We're here in Israel, and you were part of the Arabs that left and fled in 48, and your family fled to Jordan, and so on. Correct? So I mean, this is just right. So this is your connection to Israel. This is not somebody living abroad. Your English is really good, just like my English is really good, and not your typical Middle Eastern accented. But this is legit. You're from this area, and I've even seen streets in Jordan by your family name. So your roots
Well,
are definitely
there's
connected, right?
the most affluent neighborhood in Amman, the capital, is Zahran neighborhood. It's a 13,000 dunams, 13,000 dunams, a huge area, and it's named after my family. The Zahran Palace, there's the Zahran Palace. There's also the Zahran Street. So I, if I am to stick to the script, I should have enjoyed the family's wealth and not gone against the system, not rock the boat.
Hmm.
Because I had it growing up. I had everything everyone else would possibly spend a lifetime trying to achieve. I was born with it, born to it. And in fact, my work over the past almost 20 years now, has resulted in the family losing most of their net worth. I'm talking most, like up to 95% of it. So it's been very, very expensive. And you can add to it that I don't make a buck me doing what I'm doing. Some people get finance, some people charge for interviews, some people charge for speeches. I know this, least known Arab Israeli journalist,
Yeah.
and he doesn't tell people anything they don't know, only that he's an Arab and claims to be pro-Israel, and he makes up to $25,000 per speech. I never charged a dollar, and in fact, when I went to Sweden to do all those speeches, I ended up incurring a lot of the expense of the trip.
Yeah.
So I'm doing this. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I don't care what people say, and we'll move forward. Bottom line
Yeah.
is facts remain facts.
Hmm. And
Hashimites,
by the way, talking about Sweden, so this is something that we actually help. I helped you back in the day because we were living in Sweden. I'm remembering this now, and I remember like trying to help get you with your travel expenses covered and so on. And by the way, I made sure as well that Mudar had uh, like Secret Service style protection throughout his whole time because
we had, yeah,
because he's it's important the audience understands what he's going to tell you is the kind of things that get you with a target on your back from fellow extremist Muslims who don't like the truth to get out.
and
And
also
so
also from the establishment. The extremist Muslims
and the yeah,
are
yeah,
part of the establishment.
yeah.
The extremist
So yeah,
Muslims are the. I'm sorry to interrupt here,
yeah.
but the extremist Islamists are the sweetheart of the globalist establishment.
Mm,
They are one of the most successful tools which have been deployed by the globalist evil establishment, which feeds on conflict.
yeah,
Now that's why those many of those extremists are flooding the shores of Europe at the moment, that the floodgates are open. It's
mm,
all a part of divide and conquer, create crisis and manage it.
yeah,
This is why the Islamists, if you follow their track record, and we need to set the record straight, the Islamists, when they were established, tolerated, propped up by several Western administrations. And the champions of that were the Bush administration, which claimed to be fighting against Islamists post 9/11, when in reality, what he did was fight any of the enemies of Islamists, like toppling Saddam Hussein, and so forth. So,
mm,
no, none of this is by coincidence. And the fact
yeah,
that the Islamist radicals are taking over Europe by storm, and they being issued residency cards, welfare, you name it. None of this is by coincidence. We have to call things by their own name. There
yeah,
are people within the Western establishment who are very supportive of Islamists in order to achieve control over the masses and actually get their own way, because it's pretty much like terrorizing an entire neighborhood with a vicious pit bull or the
mm,
boogeyman, and you control the pit bull. So, what better? At the same
yeah,
time, yes, I remember. I appreciate your help when we went to Sweden, and the other gentleman, my our other friend, if you remember him,
yeah,
and yes, we received then full protection from the Swedish intelligence,
yeah,
and and the internal intelligence, and the armored vehicles. They were very helpful. The Kingdom of Sweden was very, very generous in receiving me, and back to the basics.
yeah,
When we talk Arab Israeli conflict, anyone with half a brain should realize by now but that the conflict is not actually between the Arabs and the Jews, or the Palestinians and the Jews. The
mm,
conflict is in reality a controlled conflict proxy war. There are many similar proxy wars. If they they, quote unquote, could launch a war between one country, North Korea and South Korea. How many people got killed? All a proxy war. We have been a proxy war for the past almost a century. The
Who's the
conflict
we? Who's the we? The we.
Palestinian Arabs and Palestinian Jews.
No.
Jews and Palestinians, so-called Palestinians and so-called Jews, because we are citizens of the same holy land. We
Hmm.
need to set the record straight. Do Jews have a connection to the land? Absolutely. You cannot deny their connection to the land.
Mm.
Do Arabs have connection to the land? First of all, most of the so-called Arabs in Palestine slash Israel, whatever you wish to call it, are not Arabs. Most of us, and
Mm.
DNA studies prove that. Most of us hold Jewish DNA. Kohanim, Jew DNA is the most dominant within Palestinian Arabs. The
Mm.
ones who are immigrants, non-Arab, non-Palestinians, non-Jews, were mostly in the major cities. Those are the ones reported by Robert Kennedy in the old days. They were immigrating to Palestine because Palestine was flourishing because of the Jewish immigration. Jews brought work, brought cars, brought technology, brought the first electricity power company to
Yeah.
In Naharim, which was joined with Jordan at the time.
Hmm.
So this was a very prosperous country, and people wanted to immigrate, but the immigration remained limited because the Arab immigrants came to the major cities, which were Jaffa, Shechem, Gaza, and to an extent, very slim extent, to Jerusalem. Most of the Palestinians are villagers, falachim, the plural sound for falach, which means peasant, like my family. We're
Yeah.
family of peasants. We
Yeah.
are originally from a village called Tel Hazorah, which is opposite to Bet Shemesh. Tel Hazorah, Beit Shemesh, and 8 collective villages around it. 8 villages. They were Jews 150 years ago. You go to my grandfather's house, when I think the Stern gang, when we left, I mean, in the middle of 1948, my grandfather had the largest house. He was the Mukhtar, the chieftain of the village, and he had the largest house in the village in Tel Hazorah.
Mm.
So the Stern gang, because they took over the place and they couldn't basically keep it. They didn't know if they can keep it. It was a vantage point. So they decided that they need to blow it up because they didn't want the Arabs to take it over and basically use it against them. So they blew up the whole place except for one piece of it. Do you know which piece?
Nah.
It was an engraved mosaic of the Lion of Judah. Why would a so-called Arab and a Muslim have the Lion of Judah in his house? You name it. The signs of Palestinians being the lost tribe is all over the place. But let's not be too happy about it because the Palestinians don't want to acknowledge it. The
Hmm.
Palestinians don't want to recognize that they are actually Jews and they were forced to convert. I am Muslim. I believe in Islam. I believe in my prophet Muhammad. I don't agree with the Hadith, the book of the Hadith, because a lot of it was written 200 years after Muhammad's death. This
What's
is
a
where we
hadith? What is that to the audience that doesn't
after the
know?
Quran, the Quran was, according to what we believe, was dictated by God. Now, the book of the Hadith Quran is barely 500 pages. The book of the Hadith is half a million plus pages,
Whoa.
narrated by men at 250 years after Muhammad's death, and the book claims those were with the words of Prophet Muhammad. The book of the hadith, some up to 5 to 10% is very good regarding, respect thy parents, don't steal, don't commit adultery, pretty much the 10 commandments, which is good. Then we
Mm.
have other stuff. We have the crazy Nazi stuff, the throwing stones, by the end of time, quote unquote, we're going to be fighting the Jews, them west to the river, which is Palestine slash Israel, Israel, today's Israel, and we east to the river, Jordan, slash, whatever, if you wish to call it Jordan today. You know, they don't mention those names, of course, but it says east of the river, west of the river, and we're going to chase the Jews where they're going to hide behind trees, and the trees are going to call the names, telling us he's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. His stones are going to tell us he's a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And then, except for quote unquote the gharkad, a certain kind of trees, which is a Jewish tree, which will not tell about them. Do you believe, as anyone with
Wow.
half a brain would accept that? Not to mention that the book of
Well,
Hadith speaks about black dogs being the devil,
well,
and
Hamas believes that, and that's part of what inspired a lot of these inhuman. I don't call it even animalistic, because animals don't act the way these men acted on October 7th. And I can only imagine that the only thing that fueled these men's minds is being brought up with this kind of teaching, but in a brainwashing, extremist environment that makes you act inhuman. It's not even a human act, right? But there's also
absolutely.
hadiths, I think, that are also in a positive too, which contradict that and says that, and this I've learned from another fellow Muslim friend of mine here, a Bedouin actually, who told me that the Quran, I think he said, or the Hadith, I'm not sure, says that there's a prophecy that Jews will be returning to the land, and that we Muslims need to help them in their return, which apparently contradicts what you just mentioned there, right?
Well, if you want to go by the Quran gives a very, and again, I'm an academic, so I
Hmm.
would be very careful when I make statements about a subject I'm not specialized at. But since we want to give the audience their share of entertainment, the Quran says that by the end of time, that the Jews have been oppressed, kicked out of their land. By the end of time, God would give him another chance. He would give them money. He would give them male children, which you can see, walking through the streets of Jerusalem. You see those young Israeli soldiers. So he did actually give him that, and then they're going to be tested.
Mm.
If they do well, if they follow the teachings of God, if they don't oppress, if they don't steal, if they don't hurt somebody, if they don't commit adultery, if they go straight, God is going to bless them. And if they don't behave and follow the line according to the Quran, they're going to be taught a lesson like never before. So this is as far as the Islamic dogma goes. But
Mm.
let's not, sink into that category. We need to talk about today. Let's
Sure.
start Jewish, and it's you're making a lot of time being here. I'm making a lot of time, a lot of sacrifice being making the time. My schedule is usually tight, and so is yours. And our
Yeah.
audience deserve to learn something. Rafah, should we start with Rafah?
All eyes on Rafah. That's the new
Yeah.
slogan, apparently, right?
Okay.
So might as
Rafah,
well.
Rafah, and I have my sources which I cannot reveal, and I've been, there has been countless examples of when I was right. A recent example is 2 years and a half ago. I made a tweet about the Iranian president, telling him to basically behave or watch out. And I told him that you might expect fire in the sky. The tweet is still there. It's 2 years and a half old. And I think it
Crazy.
manifested itself to be true. This is not, fortune telling. This is not, I'm not a clairvoyant, but trust me. Let's
Yeah.
just say I have got the right connections. Rafah, the reason both the kingdom occupation, the Hashemite occupation of Jordan slash kingdom of Jordan, and the and Egypt, the reason they have been adamant for 4 months now that Israel should never go into Rafah is they have a lot to hide.
Mm.
The tunnels with Egypt has been actually a very, very strong trade. And right on the first day of the attack, I was interviewed and I said that Egypt, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and another Arab Gulf state were involved. I wouldn't say which Arab Gulf state, but it's not Qatar. It's not the usual suspect. And now what's happening, how adamant Rafah is, how adamant Egypt and Jordan are about not Israel not conquering Rafah, breaking into Rafah, it shows that they have something to hide, and indeed they do. And a lot of this is going to come out eventually. As we stand, the Israelis control 60% of Rafah. They control the Philadelphia crossing, which is Rafah's border with Egypt. There's still 40%, an estimated 1,800 Hamas fighters left. The reason the Israelis are taking it slow is because it would cost them a lot of soldiers. They can move in today, but it will cost them a lot of soldiers. So the way they're doing is they're making them bleed to death, starving the terrorists to death with no access to ammunition, no access to water, food, and what have you, and whatnot.
What
That's
about the civilians? Because what you just said there, this is the
um,
biggest accusation that I'm facing all the time. And again,
the
if
civilian, the
if you're not,
civilians.
for the audience who's not used to seeing or hearing me, let's say this is the first time you're exposed to my podcast or me, I'm actively operating in Gaza with my unit, and I've had to combat a lot of these lies against the IDF. And literally, since the first day of the war, and on October 7th, my unit was called up. We're in a special forces unit, and we've been everywhere where the military has been operating. And there's been so many lies ongoing. And this is one of them, right? Is that we, the IDF or Israel, the government, is starving the Palestinians in Gaza. And you just pointed out to the fact that, yeah, that is happening to the terrorists. But can you explain and just kind of clarify that what at least what you know on that? I know what I know on it, but you
Okay,
tell
I know
you
what
know
I know. But the problem is, I'm not sure how much I can disclose. But I'll tell you this as much as I could.
yeah
The terrorists are in the tunnels. They need to come out for food and fuel,
yeah
and the Israeli army using depending on unprecedented number of drones, reconnaissance drones, are observing every move and every head that pops up out of the tunnels.
hmm.
As for the civilians, up to 90% of them now. There was at one point there was 1.6 million in Rafah. Now they are down to 180 to 200,000. And with the ones who left to the north, Israelis are using a lot of checkpoints to see who they are, in addition to face recognition technology, some of them deployed with drones. So a lot of Hamas fighters, they've learned that they cannot hide with the crowds when they move around because they will get caught. Not to mention that the Gazan population is very hostile to Hamas,
Hmm.
and
Really,
again,
really,
very hostile to Hamas.
that's not what
Versus
the world is saying.
the world can go to hell because the so-called the so-called experts,
Yeah,
look at what they're saying about Israel. Is any of
yeah,
it true?
yeah.
And
Tucker
the same
Carlson is
guys,
claiming that we're
same guys are
targeting
saying
Christians,
the
right?
same, yeah, the same guys
That's a big name. That's a big name right now, right? I mean,
yeah,
Tucker
yeah,
Carlson,
yeah.
right? And is that true at all? Like, do you think the IDF even, and this is the point I've made, is do you really think that we can distinguish between a Muslim and a Christian when the Christians in the small percentage who are in Gaza most likely are going to dress like Muslims so they don't get persecuted more? Am I wrong by saying that?
It's very hard to distinguish. They dress
Thank
the same. And I listen. I
thank
am
you.
not exactly
So you're
entertained.
confirming what I've told people for
Yeah,
months
yeah.
now for
I'm
these
not
stupid
exactly.
clips.
I'm not exactly entertained by so-called Western experts because
Yeah.
they know nothing, and I can never talk about my work, the nature of my work with the American government when I was working for them. But all I can tell you is at that particular place where I used to work, the so-called experts were viewed as a joke because they didn't know anything.
Wow.
Like
By
we would
the
never read their reports. We would never, would usually laugh the big names in the field. Some of
mm,
them, big names. Some of them even Jewish American names.
mm,
Like when we hear them, like, who is this? Who's this guy?
yeah.
Who the hell is this guy? They didn't
So
know
so
anything. They're
so
situated somewhere in Philadelphia, somewhere in Washington D.C., or at best somewhere in London, telling us what's going on in Gaza. How do you know? And
yeah.
now let's not waste a lot of time on it. We need to get back to what's happening in Rafah.
So those that
Rafah,
you were saying we're making fun of, in other words, you're talking about the department you were with were basically Middle Easterner people from the Middle East, right, who were like yourself, who come from those areas where the United States is operating in or what have you, and you were the ones, the locals from those areas that were making fun of the stateside classic American who didn't grow up in the Middle East, didn't grow up in the countries that where you're helping them with intel, and you were making fun of those guys. Is just to be clear for the audience so they understand
Okay,
the context.
to be clear, within the circles of decision makers, an apparatus of well informed people in Washington, D.C., none of the so called experts is taken seriously.
Wow.
So not only Middle East are not taking it seriously, when they say, oh, and so think tank and research, nobody takes that noshkite seriously. It's nonsense.
Hmm.
It's nonsense. And this current situation in Gaza is a living example of how little do they know.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy for them to buff and look important and say ununderstandable, fluid statements to make
Yeah.
themselves look important and appear in Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't consume any time listening to those people. They don't call the shots. They don't know Jack.
Yeah.
Rafah, the people moving out of Rafah, the majority has moved up to 85 to actually 90% have moved, almost 90%. We have less than 200,000 left. The ones cornered inside the tunnels, like rats, are the Hamas terrorists. The ones on the surface are receiving food from the following parties. They're receiving food from foreign aid provided, mainly through the Americans, and the Israeli, the IDF are facilitating it. They're not making anyone starve. I can authoritatively confirm there has been a shortage of food in Rafah at the moment because the businessmen, because people who facilitate the food are salesmen, people, retailers. The
Yeah.
retailers have left Rafah for feed for themselves. There's more people leaving Rafah. Now this number has settled down because in the 40% area of Rafah where people, you know, their own homes, they don't want to leave a flat to live in a tent somewhere. Most people, the 180,000%, 180,000 people have moved, ironically, to the shores of the ocean. They are sorry, to the shores, to the
Yeah. Yeah.
seashores.
Yeah.
So
That
they
I've
are there.
seen.
I think you've probably seen them. They're
Yep.
exactly the seashore. This is their way of telling the Israelis we're not a threat because in the
Mm-hmm.
seashores they're not exactly a threat to the IDF. So
Right.
Hamas is left, is left in a very, very, very difficult corner. The only problem, and again, I've got my well-informed sources for this,
Yeah.
first-hand, hands-on sources. They can move and finish him off tomorrow. The problem is, it will cost Israel a good number of soldiers, dozens of soldiers, not more necessary.
Yeah.
There's already been a lot of dead bodies given by the IDF, and a lot of Israeli families lost their children fighting in Gaza. So it's enough. It's enough. And now they will squeeze them to death. My estimate, and this is again just an estimate, Rafah will be finished within the span, but midsummer, Rafah would definitely no later than that. Rafah
Mm-hmm.
would be finished, and that's very bad news to a lot of people who are involved with Rafah, involved with Hamas, and a lot of names would mesmerize you.
Wow.
Now, what does this mean for us? As we need to again be keep people informed. That's what you're doing, and I appreciate that. The majority of Palestinians, the majority of Palestinian supports Hamas. Let me repeat: support Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
The Gazans hate Hamas with a passion because they've tried being ruled. They got their wish of an Islamic rulership, and they've been mistreated by Hamas. And this is why I'm not even a bit surprised by the claims of Hamas raping Israeli women, because Hamas soldiers never spared Palestinian women. You think they're gonna
Wow.
spare Israeli women? You
So
know,
they're doing that to their own people.
yeah, they were very famous for sexually harassment and sexually violating Palestinian women. Hamas, they would easily, sexually rape a girl, in the name. Hamas commanders would have plenty of girlfriends. I can authoritatively say that. One of them, and I do want to be controversial by saying
Hmm.
his name, one of them was a spokesperson, and he turned out to be connected to, a lot of whorehouses in Gaza and elsewhere. And so
There,
those things
there are prostitution houses in Gaza.
run by Hamas. And my Gazan
What?
friends, yes, my
But
Gazan friends,
this
Gaza,
contradicts
let,
this utopian Islamic world that they are so
no,
called
it
preaching to the
wasn't
world.
utopian. It wasn't utopian. It wasn't utopian at
Man,
all. It was hell. The
oh yeah,
the Hamas people, they were running a regime. It's like pretty much like the Soviet era leaders. They would live in luxury, drive Rolls Royces, right in plain sight, while
yeah.
they keep everyone living in under Soviet communist rule.
Hmm.
It's not a surprise. This is pretty much applies to to those kind of people. Uh,
Wow.
Gaza has always been one of the most prosperous cities in the Holy Land. Gaza's ancient. Gaza was there are Roman coins printed with the word Gaza on them. So Gaza has always been a prosperous seaport,
Hmm.
and Gaza has never known two things. There was never prostitution in Gaza. There was never hunger or poverty in Gaza. Never.
Historically, in
Thanks,
the we're talking
thanks
about
to Hamas.
thousands of years of history. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks to Hamas, for the first time ever, Gaza witnessed prostitution and hunger. Kids
Wow.
begging on the streets. This was never in Gaza. Gazans, you need to understand, most Gazans, the native Gazans, are the minority in Gaza because most Gazans are refugees who came from other sides of Israel in 1948. And those people are, the Gazan identity is very, very proud. They're very, very proud, very arrogant, if I may say, and
Hmm.
rather, standoffish. So for them to beg for food and stuff like that is like really, really out of character. So it is what it is. We need to call things by their own name. People protesting on the streets for Gaza, none of them realize what's going on. Uh, they don't actually understand what's happening on the ground. People trying to indict the Israeli leadership for war crimes. None of this is by coincidence. ICC is very politicized, and ICC is connected. It's not hatred of Jews. You need to be clear about what's happening.
Hmm.
This whole push to save Hamas is not derived by the hatred for Jews.
So
Hatred for Jews.
it's not anti-Semitism. You're saying.
It's no, no. It is. It's worse. I wish it was only hating Jews. It's
Hmm.
much worse than that.
So what is it?
It's Jews is a hating Jews is a given. I hate to say this. In the European culture, there has been Western European culture. There has been an established characteristic trait of that culture of hating Jews and blaming Jews for everything.
Hmm.
One credit I would give to Hitler is he was honest about his views. You know,
Yeah.
now anti-Semitism is harder to trace
Mm.
and actually takes a very dangerous twist of it's supporting human rights. So yes, it's driven by hating Jews, but it's more than that. It's way more than hating Jews. Who's driving the anti-Israel protest? Who's driving those globalist organizations to demonize Israel amidst this war? Globalist organizations,
Hmm.
the globalist establishment. Who is the globalist establishment? If Trump spoke about him several times. He spoke about him at the White House, at the United Nations.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
globalist establishment are the people who have benefited very, very well in World War II because of the war and who have kept the assets and command on everything since then. They're not
Hmm.
a cult. They're not a Freemasonry union. They're not anything like that. They are big, well connected, wealthy people who have done very well under the status quo. And they've created a new term, which they began using since Bush Sr. Recognized a so-called New World Order, a globalist system. Globalist system where the elite are able to create chaos, war, and trouble, and no better tool than creating war and trouble than fueling Islamism. You need to accept that Islam, my religion, my
Hmm.
beloved religion, has been used to bring chaos and disorder across the world
Yeah.
after after the Soviet Union collapsed. So
Okay. Yeah.
now, do
So
you
so
think?
this so then this leads me to what I've tried to explain to some people in private conversation, and actually I'm not even sure if I've ever said this publicly, but I pointed out that the October 7th attack was heavily influenced by Russia. Now, I'll stand corrected if you think otherwise, but this sounds exactly in the direction of what you're saying, and it's also based off of this globalist agenda. And is that correct at all?
No, not Russia at all.
No.
Not even close. The Okay, I'll try and make this simple.
Okay.
Most people look at what politicians do and they claim that politicians are stupid. Politicians, in most cases, have gone to schools better than most of us have gone to, and they have access to information which we don't. They are smart people. That's why they control you, because they're smarter than the rest of us, more informed than the rest of us. They're not stupid.
Hmm.
People call them that they are, I'm sorry for using that term, cuckolds. No, they're not. They know exactly what they're doing. They've been supporting and propping up radical Islam.
Hmm.
That's why Western capitals like Belgium, Germany, and elsewhere, they have, and including Washington, D.C., they have welcomed Islamists with open arms.
Hmm.
They've used Islamists, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood group,
Right.
to create all terror groups we know of. Those terror groups are Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda, the leader, the founding father of Al Qaeda is a Jordanian, Sheikh Abdullah Azam, Professor Abdullah Azam. He's the mentor of Osama bin Laden. He was basically trained and propped up by the Jordanian intelligence. Jordanian intelligence and the government of Jordan would never do that without an okay from the higher ups in Western capitals.
Hmm.
Um, Hamas. Hamas was the brainchild of Bush Sr. when he was vice president of the United States. It was created under the watch of the US administration at the time, and it was created, we have enough evidence that it was created in full cooperation and training, received training from the Jordanian intelligence in 1987. We have the information. We need a few episodes to explain and present the evidence.
Sure.
Hamas, according to the hierarchy, is the Palestine chapter, and I'm quoting, the Palestine chapter of Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood. Who
Hmm.
controls Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood? The King of Jordan controls Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood. You know, those this stooge and silly, fakaktas from U.S. experts and think tanks. They claim that the king is threatened by Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood. The king is well connected to Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood. The king, according to his own words, and I can happily give you the references if you wish, and if anyone wishes to look those up, The king himself said, quote unquote, the Muslim Brotherhood is a part of my regime. And I've published many articles with the American Thinker blog explaining the king's connection to the Muslim Brotherhood and how they work together.
Hmm.
Therefore, the biggest question this is how it goes. Hamas would have never pulled what they did on the 7th of October without a go ahead from the master group, which is Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood. And Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood would never, ever pull that one off without a go ahead from Jordan's king. And Jordan's king would never pull that one off without a go ahead from someone much bigger than he is.
Right.
I know who
Who?
that person is. I know who that government is. But I'm
Hmm.
not at liberty to talk about it at the moment. But it's not the United States, absolutely not the United States. And things have changed in Washington. The Islamists are no longer welcome. People would
Hmm.
wonder about what President Biden is saying and doing. It's fine, okay. It's called politics. It's the way it's done. Love, like it or not, hate the game, not the player. But
Yeah.
the Islamists are no longer the sweetheart of the U.S. establishment. The U.S. establishment is no longer interested in supporting and propping up the Islamists. This is the only reason how Israel is allowed to go after Hamas. Have you not noticed in the past? You would always, Hamas would do some stupid stuff, and you would go after Hamas for 2 months, 4 months, but you're never allowed to destroy Hamas.
Yeah.
Suddenly, Israel is pushed back when you could have destroyed Hamas. This time
Correct.
it's happening. This time you're going all the way. Something has changed. And let me explain from a strategic point of view who you are dealing with. In the old days, after the Soviet Union collapsed, the US had no enemy. You need to know that there is the patriotic forces within the US. Those patriotic forces represented by a lot of patriots in both houses, Senate and Congress. Patriots from both parties, Democrats and Republicans. Never mind the proportion there. And they want to end the conflicts. They want a prosperous America, a great America, not necessarily Trump's vision of a great America, but they are patriots and they are the globalist corrupts. Now, after the Soviet Union collapsed, US was left with no enemies and US had to invent one. And that was Islamism. So they propped up Islamist movements into the core. When Trump accused Hillary Clinton of creating ISIS with Obama, he wasn't kidding. Absolutely wasn't. The evidence is all over the place, and Jordan's King involvement is documented. It's not even a theory. It's documented by mainstream media.
Hmm.
Now, the U.S. today, so that time, the period, they gave them 25 years where they were looking for an enemy, and they could afford to mess with everyone and everything. Now the US was caught off guard. The US has a real enemy, a very threatening enemy. And I really wish for the audience to pay attention to this one because it connects immediately to what's happening in Gaza. The real enemy is China.
100%.
I'm not against China. I'm absolutely not against the Chinese government. I'm telling you how the US views the Chinese government at the moment. China is a very big country, huge, with incredible money,
Yeah.
cash to burn, endless human capital. They can get as many soldiers as they want. And they don't have the democratic agencies which would stop decision makers from making difficult decisions about war. And at the
Mm.
same time, the Chinese government and Chinese establishment is all over the place. The
Yeah.
Chinese are in Egypt. The Chinese are in Israel. You remember, and this is difficult for some people to listen. Do you remember when Israeli high techs would sell for millions for nothing?
Yeah.
Like, I know this kid. He lived in his parents' a spare room in his parents' house somewhere near Jerusalem, and he creates an app 8 years ago, an app good for nothing. Chinese investors buy it for $3 million. They were buying Israel left and right. They wanted to. The way Chinese do it is they're business people. If the
Yeah.
U.S. is interested in politics, the Chinese are interested in business. That's why
Yeah.
they're more welcomed by most countries. So suddenly the U.S. found itself off guard, and it's very likely that the U.S. is in a collision course with China.
Hmm.
Therefore, U.S. has to end the the stupid wreck all over the Middle East and elsewhere. U.S. cannot afford the entertainment of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which the U.S. establishment has been fueling and propping up for the past 60, 70 years minimum.
Hmm.
It's a sideshow which the U.S. establishment has capitalized on and turned it into a major show. And now they realize they need both Israelis and Arabs happy in order to, God forbid, someday they had to face China. Now the Israelis are pissed off at the United States. The Arabs are pissed off at the United States. They think it's the enemy. With
Right.
what Bush did in Iraq, toppling a whole government for nothing. In
Yeah.
power in Iran, US and Iran, they have a very special relationship. So the Sunni Arab Muslim majority, and thinking of them, are enemies. And the Israelis don't like them. So could the US afford to go to war, God forbids, with China 10, 15 years away from now, with the Middle East fully hateful of the United States? Why would we support them? Why would you agree to send Israeli soldiers to fight with them? Why
Hmm.
would you allow Jordanian and Palestinian soldiers in the future to go fight China, or at least support and die for U.S. interest in the region? Let's
Yeah.
not forget China, because of the way the Egyptian government has been pushed away by the United States under Obama. President Sisi has jumped right into the Chinese lap, and he what have you now? You have the Suez Canal fully under China's control.
Hmm.
So the U.S. has awakened to the problem, to the predicament it found itself in. And how does this connect to you and I? Drawn.
Yeah.
It connects to you and I that the U.S. for the first time wants the Israeli-Arab conflict solved at any cost. At any cost. That's why you didn't hear about crap like the peace process. What
Hmm.
they need to do, and I'm telling you what's going to happen next. And quote my words, hold me accountable for this. One, we're going to get rid of Hamas. Then, next in line will be the Muslim Brotherhood in the region. The HQ of the Muslim Brotherhood in the region is in Jordan. Jordan hosts the global HQ of the world's Muslim Brotherhood, and I've made a lot of documentation with evidence of that.
Hmm.
Sheikh Hammam Saeed, a Jordanian, is the controller of the Muslim Brotherhood across the world. When Erdogan became prime minister 19 years ago, the first thing he did was travel to Jordan, meet Sheikh Hammam Saeed and the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, then meet with the King of Jordan. And the King of Jordan is designated as the godfather or number zero. They call him number zero for the Muslim Brotherhood. It's like Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood to the king is like the ruling party for Netanyahu, like the Likud for Netanyahu, or the Chinese Communist Party for President Xi. If the King of Jordan falls, Muslim Brotherhood goes down the drain. If the Muslim Brotherhood falls, the king is no more. The joint at the hip, and I tell ya, that's why the king is going like running around like a headless chicken. That's why his wife made 5 interviews saying the most hurtful anti-Semitic words, claiming Israel is involved in genocide, claiming Israel is a pariah state, even ridiculing those who claimed that anti-Semitism exists. She said, no, it's criticizing Israel. It's not that. So this woman, to have the chutzpah to say
Yeah.
that right on U.S. television, she and her husband are going crazy because they know what's next. What's next is doing away with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that means doing away with the Hashimite regime because it's going to follow. And then after that, it's going to be Hezbollah. This is how
Yeah.
it's going to go. I am an ex-fighter pilot. You know, you don't pay as much attention to time. Time is critical, of its essence, but you would be more concerned by procedures. When you're a pilot, you cannot do one procedure before the other. Even if it's the right procedure, you have to do things in order, in a chronological manner, one step after another. And even when you retract, when you land the airplane, again, it's reversing what you've been doing one step after another. So I'm more focused on technical procedures rather than when. And therefore, I don't discuss time. But what I can assure you is this is how it's going to go. Hezbollah after Jordan, Jordan after Hamas. And it's not because anyone has anything against the king of Jordan. He's a nobody. He doesn't make a difference. The problem is with the snake he's hosting in his place. The snake he's become, joined at the hip to.
Mm.
Now, after that, we're going to look at a whole different scenario for the Palestinian Israeli conflict, which will include a change of situation where the majority in Jordan will be ruled by, would definitely elect a Palestinian ruler because, and that's a game changer. It's very
Hmm.
unfortunate how some of your so-called friends stood against you at the time. I think you saw how United Arab Emirates Ron has been leading the fight to recognize a Palestinian state in the United Nations, and it shows that back to the basics. How can do you remember when Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and so-called peace advisor, I'm not sure if that was his title, created the Abrahamic Accord?
Yeah.
They were
Of course.
just a very lame diversion from what Israel should have done and could have done, which is annexing the West Bank.
Right.
Palestinians in the West Bank would welcome an Israeli annexation. Yes,
Mm.
they hate Jews. Yes, they think this is their land, but they would rather get Israeli benefits. Israeli,
Right.
I could talk about it for hours. What stopped that? U.S. administration pressured Netanyahu not to do it, talked him out of it, pushed him, and there was the United Arab Emirates making a statement that, oh, please don't annex the West Bank because if you annex it, we won't be able to sign peace. And you got the Abrahamic Accords. The Abrahamic Accords, in theory, are beautiful, but they're not worth
In theory. In theory.
the paper they're written on. The
Wow.
United Arab Emirates voted against you in the UN several times for the benefit of the Palestinian Authority, and I can give you the track record. United
Hmm.
Arab Emirates has pushed very hard for recognition of the Palestinian state. Top advisors to the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, and I happily give you names and guide them to Twitter, in a country like the United Arab Emirates, where you cannot say anything without you out of the general line of the government. They've been speaking very ill of Israel. I'm not against the United Arab Emirates. I love the United Arab Emirates. I love Dubai. At the same time, facts first. You cannot have peace with Arab countries very, very far away before you can have peace in Jerusalem. What use is peace with Dubai or peace with Abu Dhabi or peace with Morocco or even Sudan or even Bahrain if you cannot have calm at home in Jerusalem? And the only way to have calm at home in Jerusalem is for the Palestinians to have a state. You can't keep them stateless. How do they have a state? Oslo is no way to have a state. Any Palestinian state at the moment west of the river is not feasible.
Mm.
It will only bring more Israeli dead children and more Israeli raped women, like we saw. So we need some practical solution that actually works. The practical solution is liberating 78% to Palestine, which is Jordan, and allowing the 97% majority, again, I repeat, 97.3% majority to rule itself in Jordan. The Palestinian Arabs in the Nashtachim or the West Bank have always been citizens of Jordan. You, Ron, most Israelis, all Israelis would never support ethnic cleansing of the Arabs from the territories of the Judea and Samaria. But those Arabs, they want a state, they want a parliament, they want a place they can call home. They have a state called Jordan.
Mm.
The Jordanian government should restore the citizenship it took away from all Palestinians in the Nashtachim illegally against international law and against Jordanian law. We have a
When did they do this? When exactly was it that?
1988, after
Mhm.
having collected taxes from the Palestinians for close to 60 years. Okay, actually, yeah, exactly. After they have collected taxes from the Jordanians for 40 years, we've paid their taxes. There was nothing in the Hashemite kingdom. They had no money. I'm an academic. My specialty is the Arab-Israeli conflict. They had nothing. We built Jordan from nothing with the help of our brothers, the native Jordanians, the East Bankers, who, by the
Mhm.
way, hold no hostility to us, no hostility towards Israel either. At the
Mhm.
same time, they took our taxes and they just dropped us the way you would drop, a used towel, paper towel, throw it into the trash, and took away our citizenship. 1988. How can you do that? It's against the law to make people stateless. It's against the
Mhm.
Jordanian law. There's even more than that. Jordanian Citizenship Act, Article 2, 1952, states that any Palestinian, born Palestinian, who is not Jewish is an automatic citizen of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So we need to set the record straight. We need to call things by their own name. I live in London. Do you realize how many Europeans reside in London without having a passport? I grew up in New Hampshire, USA. And in northern New Hampshire, we had a lot of Canadians working in New Hampshire and traveling over the weekend to Quebec. They
Mm.
never claimed citizenship in the United States. They never claimed anything more than residency in New Hampshire, and they didn't want their own parliament. There was a parliament in Ottawa, Canada, to which they could have voted. Without this solution, there will never be a solution.
Mm.
And again, let me remember people like, for example, Daniel Pipes, a very, very, very impressive scholar, very formidable scholar, Jewish American. Him and others advocated the words keeping the status quo. Well, we saw where the status quo went on the 7th of October. The
Yeah.
status quo is unsustainable, unfair, and trust me, it's not fun for the Israelis. The Israelis do not enjoy setting checkpoints in the Nashtachim. The
Yeah.
Israelis do not enjoy arguing with Palestinians over the Temple Mount. The Israeli soldiers would rather drink a beer and watch a movie rather than fighting with Palestinians all over the place. It's not.
100%. And
It's
I'm an
not.
Israeli soldier, and I can tell you that by
And
talking
so
to
you are.
fellow
Yeah.
soldiers who have served in Judea, Samaria at the checkpoints. And one of the toughest positions in the military, actually, if you're a combat soldier, is to be at one of those checkpoints, not fighting terrorists, not, it's the psychological frustrations of, like you just said, like who wants to deal with arguing with people on the daily, and that those people who are also miserable with the situation want to make your life miserable because they see you as the enemy because you're the one who's standing between them and their goal, which is simply to work in Israel, right? And so you're that obstacle, so to speak, and then you become the one who gets the brunt of their frustration, and vice versa. You're the brunt, you know, of theirs. So it's back and forth. Nobody enjoys that. 100%. Israel doesn't want that.
And the Israelis, I can authoritatively say, and I will say it in both Arabic and English, Israelis, the average Israeli, doesn't bear any form of hatred towards the Palestinian Arabs or Arabs in general. الإسرائيلي الاعتيادي، الشخص الإسرائيلي العادي، أنا أستطيع أن أتكلم بكل دقة، لا يحمل أي نوع من الكراهية تجاه الفلسطينيين العرب أو العرب عموما. That said, we need a new chapter. You need to accept some fools from both sides. They mistake the proxy war into a genuine conflict.
Hmm.
Both are victims. The Palestinian being asked for his ID at the checkpoint, and the Israelis holding an M16 rifle. Both are victims. Both are clowns acting in a very bad, dark comedy orchestrated by the higher ups who hate both
Yeah.
Arabs and Jews.
Yeah.
We need a way out, and this I can promise. Uh, the light is upon us for a new chapter in our history. And I can assure you, as the future leader of Jordan, as the current leader of Jordan's majority, there will be a new chapter. There will be a new light. And for the first time, we will be what we were supposed to be prior to 1929, prior to the Mufti igniting the war and the massacres in Hebron, which came out of nowhere.
Hmm.
This conflict is short of 100 years old between both of us. Now it's time for us to bury it. It's time for us to melt some weapons and start creating shovels to build and do our farming with it. Expect the unexpected in the foreseen future. Things will change, and inshallah, and I'm saying this both in Arabic and English because my people need to listen, that we will be welcoming our Palestinian Jews in Jordan. We will be allowing Jews to make aliyah to Jordan, and they will once they see the country safe. We will welcome the first synagogue in Jordan. I will pray Islamically in the first synagogue in Jordan. And I'm telling everyone in advance, for me, as Mudar Zahran, the difference between Palestinian Jordanians and Jews slash Israelis is asking me to make a difference, ask me to choose a favorite, is exactly like asking me to choose a favorite of one of my eyes. One eye over another. I want both my eyes intact and I want them both healthy and safe. Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, shalom, love for everyone. And may the hands of God save the children in Gaza, save Israeli children, and save the Israeli soldiers fighting in Gaza. It's the same God who saved Israel and Moses, the same God who saved Muhammad from the infidels, idol worshippers chasing him into Medina. It's the same God. He's done it once, he can do it again. All the pharaohs of the region, I am already telling you, you will meet Pharaoh's fate in the foreseen future for the amount of blood you have shed, for the amount of support you provided for the terrorists, for the amount of hatred you inflicted upon Jews who've done nothing to you, and also for the amount of demonization and abuse you've given to the Palestinians at your own hand. This is our time. Mark my words. Thanks for having me, Mom.
Well, Mudar, I really appreciate that, brother. This has been a great interview. I appreciate all the insights that you brought to the audience. I think it's been important. We've had different people on this podcast: Christian, Druze, and now you. And that's the idea: is to give people the insights from people who live here, their real experience versus the media portrayal of how things are here. Mudar, I really appreciate your time. And I know that the people listening have got a lot of good information from you today. And may you be blessed, my brother. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Israel Chai, Ummat Israel Hayya. I'm Israel Chai, I'm Jordan Chai, Ummat Israel Hayya, Ummat al-Urdun wa Palestine Hayya. Assalamu alaikum.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate that.